Hello, I'm here to talk to you about the local news industry. The local news industry is in a bit of a state of crisis because their revenue models are being upended. So here's what's happening. You know, if we have news organizations, I'm just going to abbreviate that NP for newspaper, although it need not be a paper. The way that newspapers have traditionally made their money is largely through attracting advertisers. So advertisers would pay the newspaper money in order to get access to readers, to an audience. Okay, so at the other end of the spectrum you have readers, and readers would see the ads, which was the reason that advertisers would pay for the newspaper. The problem is this middle box is going away. So there are so many other ways of reaching consumers. So if news organizations are going to remain viable, they're going to need to create a direct link from readers to the newspaper. So they're going to have to get readers to be willing to pay for their news. Now, there are so many other examples where consumers pay for a media product. You know, think about Netflix. I'll pay $10 a month for a Netflix subscription. I'll pay money to a cable TV provider for access to cable channels. So news organizations have to find a way to have readers willing to pay for their products. Now, the most obvious way is to add a box in the middle, which I'm going to abbreviate subs for subscriptions. My name is Ed Malthouse. I'm a professor at Northwestern University, and we have a research organization called the Local News Initiative that is attempting to understand how you get readers to pay for local news products. I'm here today to tell you about what we've done. So we worked with 4 different news organizations, and we were able to get their data. So we have data on who currently subscribes, and then more importantly, what they're reading. And so we're using different statistical methods to understand how what a consumer reads links to whether or not they're willing to remain a subscriber. Okay, so let me kind of sketch out what we've done in a little bit more detail. At the end of the day, what news organizations really care about is willingness to pay. They want to have subscribers who are willing to pay for the product. Now, again, the most obvious way for this to happen is through a subscription service, but there could be other approaches like events. Now, we had their reading behaviors, so let's just write that as reader behaviors. And we wanted to understand how these different reader behaviors affect the willingness to pay. So I'm just going to write, how is this affected? We're not quite sure. So there are many ways that I can characterize the way that people read a newspaper. Maybe the most famous one is page views. So this is just a count of the number of pages that I look at. Now, this is one of the key metrics that the news industry has been following for the simple reason that it's directly linked to advertising. So the more pages that I look at, the more likely, the more ads that you can expose me to, and the more money they make from advertisers. Another metric that the news organization has followed for a long time is the time spent with the product. So the more time I spend on the website, again, the more opportunity there is to expose me to ads, and the more opportunity there is to make money. Okay. Another important measure, we can call this the habit. Okay. So what I mean by a habit is it's the number of days per, say, month where I read or look into the paper. So how many days per month am I reading the newspaper? Now, it was somewhat surprising to us that the most powerful predictor of being willing to remain a subscriber was this daily habit. In fact, if you control for daily habit, page views and time don't have much of an effect at all. Okay, so what this means is that the news industry, if they want subscriptions, needs to create this daily habit, which is a completely different metric than what they've been following. So they've been tracking page views because it's linked to advertising. Now they need to focus on creating this habit. All right, so if creating a habit is the key to retaining subscribers, the next question is, how do you create this habit? What sorts of content makes a subscriber want to come back every day? So one way that we looked at this was to divide news content into two broad types. So the first type, I'm going to just abbreviate COM for commoditized. So what commoditized content is it's content that you can easily find elsewhere, and often it may be done better elsewhere. So if I'm interested in the NFL, ESPN does a great job of covering the NFL as well as many other news organizations. If I'm interested in recipes, there's a million sources for recipes. If I'm interested in Congress, again, there's any number of cable news outlets, magazines, national newspapers that cover Congress. So I'm going to call this commoditized content because local news organizations don't have any strategic advantage in covering these. Alternatively, you can look at differentiated content. So what differentiated content is all about is content that other news organizations don't necessarily cover. So a local news organization is uniquely at an advantage to cover these things. So this is going to be what's happening in local government, what's happening in state government often. Often local news organizations have exceptional coverage of the local sports teams. So in Indianapolis, for example, Indy does a great job of covering the Pacers, and that I would say that's differentiated content in Indy. Likewise, coverage of local business would be another example of this. So what we found was that this differentiated content, reading differentiated content was the most important driver of creating a habit. To some extent, this commoditized content drives a habit, but it's much weaker. Moreover, there's a direct link between the amount of this differentiated content that I consume and my likelihood to remain a subscriber. So let me summarize. The news industry needs to find new ways of supporting itself because the old advertising models don't work anymore. So the way that they can do this is by getting readers willing to pay for subscriptions and other services that the news organizations can provide. So if the goal then is to drive subscriptions, we need to focus on very different metrics. We no longer want to chase page views and time per page. We want to make it as easy as possible for consumers to derive value from the newspaper. We want them to have a daily habit where I as a consumer feel like I'm getting value from the newspaper every day. And the more often that I read this paper, the more likely I am to remain a subscriber. So how do you do that? Well, you need good differentiated content in order to get me coming back every day. To some extent, commoditized content will help, but this is really the key to creating that daily habit. Thank you for listening.